The whispers followed Nora Nichols through the dusty streets of Downieville, California, like a persistent shadow that the bright summer sun of 1873 couldn't chase away. "There she goes, the widow-maker," they'd say, just loud enough for her to hear as she passed by with her chin held high, and her heart tucked safely behind walls built from grief and disappointment. Nora was 28 years old and had buried 3 husbands in the past decade. The first, Thomas Whitaker, had been carried off by typhoid fever just 6 months after their wedding day when Nora was barely 19. The second, James Cromwell, died 2 years later in a mining accident that claimed 5 other men as well. The third, Edward Patterson, was shot in a saloon brawl last spring, a wrong place, wrong time tragedy that sealed Nora's reputation in Downieville as a woman cursed by fate. That morning, as Nora made her way to the millinery shop where she worked, she kept her gaze straight ahead, ignoring the murmurs that followed her. The shop belonged to Mrs. Holloway, one of the few people in town who didn't treat Nora like she carried death in the folds of her skirts. "Morning, Mrs. Patterson," Mrs. Holloway called as Nora entered. The older woman still used Nora's last married name, though Nora had begun to wonder if she should revert to her maiden name. What was the point of keeping the name of a dead man when everyone in town only referred to her as that cursed woman anyway? "Good morning, Mrs. Holloway," Nora replied, hanging her shawl on the hook by the door and moving behind the counter to begin the day's work. The little bell above the door tinkled again, and Nora looked up to see Beatrice Campbell, the banker's wife, enter with her ever-present expression of disdain. "I need a new hat for Sunday services," Beatrice announced without preamble. "Something with blue ribbon to match my new dress." Her gaze slid to Nora and her lips thinned. "I'll have Mrs. Holloway assist me, of course." Mrs. Holloway emerged from the back room, her kind face creasing with a forced smile. "Good morning, Mrs. Campbell. I'm afraid I'm in the middle of inventory. Mrs. Patterson will be happy to help you select something suitable." Beatrice's nostrils flared. "I think not. I'll return another time." As she swept out, Nora's shoulders sagged. Mrs. Holloway patted her hand sympathetically. "Pay her no mind, dear. Some people are just determined to be unpleasant." "It's not just her," Nora said quietly. "It's everyone. Perhaps I should leave Downieville, start fresh somewhere no one knows about my history." "Nonsense," Mrs. Holloway replied firmly. "This is your home. Those gossips will find something new to cluck about soon enough." But Nora wasn't so sure. In a town this size, some stories never died, they just became legends, cautionary tales mothers told their sons about the woman who had married 3 times, only to see each husband to an early grave. The bell rang again, and this time a tall man with broad shoulders and a sun-weathered face entered. Nora recognized him instantly as Brody Kane, the owner of the Cross K Ranch outside of town. He'd moved to the area about a year ago, buying up the old Hamilton place and turning it into one of the most prosperous cattle operations in the county. She'd seen him around town, but had never spoken to him directly. "Good morning, ladies," he said, removing his hat to reveal thick dark hair with just a touch of gray at the temples. He couldn't have been more than 35, but his eyes carried a depth that suggested he'd seen his share of hardship. "Mr. Kane, what a pleasant surprise, Mrs. Holloway greeted him. "What brings you to our humble establishment? My sister's birthday is approaching," he explained, his deep voice carrying a slight Texas drawl. "Thought I might find something nice to send her. She's partial to pretty things, and there's not much opportunity for a woman to dress up where she's living in Denver." "How thoughtful," Mrs. Holloway beamed. "Mrs. Patterson here has an excellent eye for feminine tastes. I'm sure she can help you select something appropriate." Nora froze as Brody Kane's attention turned to her. She expected to see the usual flicker of recognition followed by discomfort that men exhibited when they realized who she was. Instead, his blue eyes remained warm and direct. "Mrs. Patterson," he nodded politely. "I'd be obliged for your assistance." For the next half hour, Nora helped him select a beautiful lace collar with matching cuffs that would complement any dress. Throughout their interaction, he treated her with a respectful courtesy that had become rare in her experience. As she wrapped his purchase, he asked, "Do you enjoy working here, Mrs. Patterson?" The question caught her off guard. "Yes," she answered honestly. "Mrs. Holloway is kind, and I've always had an interest in beautiful things." He nodded thoughtfully. "Beauty matters in this world. Gives us something to hope for." He accepted the package and placed his hat back on his head. "Thank you for your help. Good day to you both." After he left, Mrs. Holloway gave Nora a speculative look. "Well now, that's a fine man. Widower himself, they say. Lost his wife in childbirth some years back." "Mrs. Holloway," Nora warned, "don't start with your matchmaking. The last thing that man needs is to be linked with someone like me." "Someone like you," the older woman echoed. "You mean a kind, hard-working young woman who's had more than her fair share of sorrow," Nora sighed, turning away to straighten a display of ribbons. "You know what I mean. The cursed widow. The woman no man in Downieville would dare court for fear of ending up 6 feet under." "Poppycock, Mrs. Holloway dismissed. "Superstitious nonsense." But Nora had lived with the whispers too long to dismiss them so easily. She'd begun to wonder if there wasn't some truth to what they said. 3 good men gone, and she the common thread between them. The next week passed uneventfully, with Nora keeping to her routine of work and solitude. She lived in a small cabin on the edge of town that had belonged to her first husband, Thomas. She'd managed to hold onto it through the years, a feat that had raised eyebrows among those who found it suspicious that a woman with no family connections could maintain her independence. On Saturday, Nora was minding the shop alone while Mrs. Holloway visited her sister in nearby Nevada City. The afternoon was quiet until Sheriff Wade Miller entered, his expression grim. "Mrs. Patterson," he said, nodding stiffly, "got some news you should hear from me directly rather than the gossip mill." Nora's heart quickened. "What is it, Sheriff?" "We caught the man who shot your husband, Edward. He was picked up in Sacramento for another crime and confessed to several shootings, including the one here." Nora gripped the counter for support. "He confessed?" "Yes, madam. Said he had a grudge against the saloon owner and was aiming for him. Your husband just happened to step into the line of fire." The sheriff cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Thought you should know it wasn't not personal, just random, terrible luck, like Thomas's typhoid, like James's mining accident, just the cruel hand of fate, not a curse." "Thank you for telling me," she said softly. After the sheriff left, Nora closed the shop early. She needed air, space to think. She walked to the small cemetery on the hill overlooking town where her 3 husbands lay buried in a row. She rarely visited any more. The sight of those 3 headstones side by side was too stark a reminder of her strange fate. Standing before them now, she felt a curious lightness. Perhaps knowing that Edward's death had been a tragic accident rather than some supernatural punishment lifted some invisible weight. "I thought I might find you here." The voice startled her. She turned to see Brody Kane standing a respectful distance away, hat in hand. "Mr. Kane," she acknowledged, wondering what he was doing at the cemetery. "I apologize for intruding," he said. "I was visiting my friend's grave, Jack Prentice. He was foreman at my ranch until pneumonia took him last winter." He gestured to a fresh grave several plots away. Nora nodded. "I'm sorry for your loss." "As I am for yours," he replied, his gaze moving to the 3 markers before her. There was no judgment in his eyes, only a deep understanding that made her breath catch. "People in town," she began hesitantly, "they call me cursed." A small smile touched his lips. "People say a lot of foolish things. 3 husbands dead within 10 years, she pointed out. "It does seem like more than coincidence." "Seems to me like a woman who's had more than her fair share of tragedy," he countered, echoing Mrs. Holloway's words. "But not a curse." "You're not from here," Nora said. "You don't understand how it is." "I understand small towns and small minds well enough," he replied. "My wife died giving birth to our son 8 years ago. In my hometown in Texas, there were those who whispered that I'd worked her too hard, didn't get the doctor in time. Truth was, there were complications no one could have foreseen." His frank sharing of his own pain startled her. "And your son," a shadow crossed his face, "didn't survive either." "2 graves in one day." "I'm so sorry," she whispered. He nodded, accepting her sympathy. "Life deals hard hands sometimes, Mrs. Patterson. Doesn't mean we're cursed. Just means we've got to find the strength to keep playing the cards we're dealt." They stood in silence for a moment, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the graves. "Would you permit me to walk you back to town?" he asked finally. She hesitated, aware of how it would look, the cursed widow walking alongside one of the most eligible men in the county. "People will talk. Let them," he said simply. "I've never much cared for gossip." Against her better judgment, Nora found herself accepting his offer. As they walked down the hill toward town, she was acutely aware of the stares they attracted. She could almost hear the whispers starting already. "Poor Mr. Kane. Doesn't he know what happens to men who get too close to Nora Nichols?" "Mr. Kane," she said quietly as they approached the main street. "I appreciate your kindness, but perhaps it would be better if we parted here." He studied her face. "Are you concerned for my reputation or yours?" The question caught her off guard. "Yours, of course. Mine is already beyond salvaging." "I disagree," he said firmly. "And I'm perfectly capable of deciding whose company I wish to keep without consulting the town gossips." He offered his arm. "Now, may I escort you home, or would you prefer I leave you here?" Something in his steady gaze made Nora straighten her spine. She placed her hand lightly on his arm. "My home is just beyond the Mercantile." They continued their walk, ignoring the stares that followed them. When they reached her small cabin, Brody tipped his hat. "Thank you for the pleasant company, Mrs. Patterson. I wonder if you might consider joining me for dinner at the hotel restaurant tomorrow evening." Nora's heart raced. "Mr. Kane, are you certain that's wise?" "I'm certain I'd like to continue our conversation in a setting more comfortable than a cemetery," he replied with a small smile. 7 o'clock. Before she could formulate all the reasons why she should refuse, Nora heard herself saying, 7 o'clock. After he left, she leaned against her door, wondering what madness had possessed her to accept his invitation. Nothing good could come of it, not for him, certainly, and likely not for her either. Yet there had been something in his eyes, a steadiness that made her want to trust him despite all the lessons life had taught her about the fragility of happiness. The next day passed in a blur of anticipation and anxiety. By 6:30, Nora had changed her mind about going at least a dozen times. In the end, she put on her best dress, a deep blue wool that brought out the color of her eyes, and pinned up her chestnut hair in a simple but elegant style. The hotel restaurant was the finest establishment in Downieville, a place Nora rarely visited anymore. As she entered, the hum of conversation dimmed noticeably. She spotted Brody immediately, standing as she approached the table he'd secured in a quiet corner. "Mrs. Patterson," he greeted her, pulling out her chair. "You look lovely this evening." "Thank you," she replied, fighting the urge to flee as she felt the weight of stares from around the room. "Though I fear I've caused quite a stir by accepting your invitation." "Let them stare," he said calmly, taking his seat across from her. "They'll find something new to gossip about by week's end." The waiter approached cautiously, as if Nora might somehow cause a disaster merely by ordering dinner. Brody's pointed look had the man straightening and proceeding with professional courtesy. Once they'd ordered, Brody leaned forward slightly. "Tell me about yourself, Mrs. Patterson, not what the town says the truth." Nora found herself telling him about growing up as the daughter of a prospector who'd come to California in '49 with dreams of striking it rich. How her parents had both died of influenza when she was 16, leaving her alone in the world. How Thomas Whitaker, a kind shopkeeper 10 years her senior, had offered marriage as much out of compassion as affection. "He was good to me," she said softly. "We were just beginning to build a true marriage when the typhoid took him." She told him about the 2 years she'd spent supporting herself as a seamstress before James Cromwell, a mining engineer, had courted her. Their 18 months together had been happy, filled with plans for the future, until the day the mine collapsed. Edward Patterson, her third husband, had been different, a gambling man with a quick smile who'd swept into her life like a summer storm. Their marriage had been brief and tumultuous, ending when he took a bullet meant for another man. 3 different men, 3 different lives, she concluded. "The only common thread is me, which is why people believe what they believe." Brody had listened intently, his gaze never wavering. "I see a different common thread," he said. "A woman with remarkable resilience. Many would have broken under just one of those losses." His words warmed something inside her that had been cold for a very long time. "What about you?" she asked. "What brought you to Downieville after your loss in Texas?" "Needed a fresh start," he explained. "Couldn't bear to ranch the same land where I'd planned to raise a family. Sold everything, headed west, looking for a place that felt right. When I saw the old Hamilton place with the river running through it and the mountains rising up behind, something just settled in me." "I know that feeling," Nora admitted. "Despite everything, I've never been able to leave this place. It's home for better or worse." Their dinner arrived, and conversation flowed easily between them. Brody told her about his ranch, the challenges and rewards of building it into a successful operation. Nora shared stories about the more amusing aspects of working in the millinery shop, particularly Mrs. Holloway's determined matchmaking efforts for every unmarried person in town. By the time they finished their meal, Nora realized she hadn't laughed so freely in years. More surprisingly, she'd almost forgotten about the other diners and their judging eyes. Almost, but not quite. As Brody escorted her from the restaurant, she overheard a woman at a nearby table whisper loudly to her companion, "Poor man doesn't know what he's getting himself into. They say death follows her like a shadow." Nora stiffened, but Brody's hand at her elbow remained steady. Outside, the night air was cool and crisp, stars speckling the black sky above the silhouette of the Sierra Nevada mountains. "I should get you home," he said, offering his arm again. "It's getting late." They walked in companionable silence through the quiet streets. When they reached her cabin, Nora turned to thank him for the evening. "I've enjoyed your company, Mrs. Patterson," he said before she could speak. "I'd like to call on you again if you're amenable." Nora hesitated. "Mr. Kane, Brody," he corrected gently. "Brody," she amended, the name feeling foreign on her tongue. "You heard what they were saying. You must know the risk to your reputation. I'm concerned with facts, not superstition," he interrupted. "And the fact is, I haven't enjoyed an evening so much in a very long time." "Nor have I," she admitted. "But that doesn't change the reality of my situation." He stepped closer, his expression serious in the moonlight. "Nora, may I call you Nora?" When she nodded, he continued, "I'm not a man who fears shadows or whispers. I make my own judgments based on what I see with my own eyes and hear with my own ears. And what I see is a woman of remarkable strength and grace who's been dealt a terrible hand by fate." His words touched something deep inside her, a place that had been walled off for protection. "Even if you don't believe in the curse," she said quietly, "others do. They'll make things difficult for you, for us if there were to be an us. I've never been one to take the easy path when the right path lies elsewhere," he replied simply. "May I call on you Tuesday evening? Perhaps we could take a walk by the river." Against all reason and self-preservation, Nora found herself agreeing. After he departed with a tip of his hat, she went inside and sat in the darkness of her cabin, wondering if she was being selfish by allowing him into her life. Wondering if the whispers might be right after all. The next few weeks passed in a whirlwind of change for Nora. True to his word, Brody called on her regularly. They took walks along the river, shared meals at the hotel restaurant, and gradually, tentatively, began building something that felt dangerously like hope. The town's reaction was exactly as Nora had predicted. The whispers intensified, following her everywhere. Mrs. Holloway defended her fiercely, but even her support couldn't shield Nora from the growing concern that seemed to permeate Downieville about Brody Kane's welfare. One afternoon in late August, Sheriff Miller stopped by the millinery shop when Nora was working alone. "Mrs. Patterson," he began awkwardly, "I feel it's my duty to have a word with you about your association with Mr. Kane." Nora's hands stilled on the hat she was trimming. "My personal affairs are not the concern of the law, Sheriff." "No, madam, they're not," he agreed. "But the well-being of the citizens of this town is my concern, and Mr. Kane is a respected member of this community." "Are you suggesting I'm a threat to him?" Nora asked, her voice dangerously calm. The sheriff fidgeted with his hat. "I'm suggesting that perhaps the pattern of your past might give you pause before allowing another man to court danger." "Court danger or court me, Sheriff?" Nora set down her work and faced him squarely. "Because, if you're implying what I think you are, I find it deeply offensive that a man of the law would give credence to superstitious nonsense." Sheriff Miller had the grace to look uncomfortable. "I'm just saying that 3 dead husbands is a fact, not superstition, Mrs. Patterson." "And the causes of those deaths are also facts," she countered. "Typhoid, a mine collapse, and a stray bullet, none of which had anything to do with me beyond the cruelty of fate." "Be that as it may, that will be all, Sheriff," she interrupted, turning back to her work. "Unless you're here to purchase a hat, I believe our conversation is concluded." After he left, Nora's hands trembled so badly she had to set aside her work. If the sheriff himself believed in the curse, what hope was there that the rest of the town would ever see her as anything but a harbinger of death? That evening, Brody arrived at her door as planned, but Nora couldn't bring herself to maintain the pretense that their relationship had any future. "I can't do this anymore," she told him bluntly as soon as he entered, his brow furrowed. "Can't do what? This?" She gestured between them. "Us. Whatever we've been pretending might be possible." Brody's expression grew serious. "I haven't been pretending anything, Nora." "Then you're fooling yourself," she insisted. "The sheriff came to see me today, to warn me away from you, essentially." "When the law itself considers me a danger, Miller's a good sheriff but a superstitious man," Brody interrupted, "and I don't need his protection or his approval." "It's not just him, it's everyone. The entire town is watching and waiting for tragedy to strike you down." "Let them watch," Brody said simply. Nora shook her head, frustration welling up. "You don't understand. I'm beginning to wonder if they're right. 3 husbands, Brody. 3 good men who might still be alive if they'd never met me. Or who might have died anyway, because death comes for us all in its own time, he countered. Thomas had typhoid, half the town was sick that year. James died with 5 other men when that mine collapsed. Edward was shot in a saloon known for violence. None of those deaths had anything to do with you. You can't know that, she whispered. He stepped closer, taking her hands in his. I know that I've spent my life trusting my instincts and they've rarely led me wrong. And my instincts tell me that you're a woman who's suffered enough for 3 lifetimes and deserves happiness. And what if that happiness comes at the cost of your life? She asked, her voice breaking. Then it would be a price willingly paid, he said softly. But Nora, I don't believe for one second that loving you would doom me. Quite the opposite, I think it might save me from the half-life I've been living since I lost my family. His words struck her heart like lightning, illuminating feelings she'd been trying desperately to ignore. She pulled her hands away, needing distance to think clearly. I need time, she said finally. This is all happening too fast. Brody nodded, respecting her space. Take all the time you need, I'll be here when you're ready. After he left, Nora paced her small cabin late into the night, torn between desire and fear. By morning, she'd made her decision. She would leave Downieville. It was the only way to protect Brody from whatever dark cloud seemed to follow her, and to give herself a chance at a new beginning somewhere her past wasn't common knowledge. She gave Mrs. Holloway her notice, explaining that she needed a fresh start. The older woman was devastated, but understood. Nora spent the next week making arrangements, selling what few possessions she couldn't take with her, and purchasing a stage-coach ticket to Sacramento. She didn't contact Brody, hoping a clean break would be easiest for them both. But 2 days before her planned departure, he appeared at her door, his expression thunderous. Were you planning to leave without saying goodbye? He demanded. Nora stepped back, allowing him to enter. How did you find out? Small town, he reminded her. Mrs. Holloway mentioned it to the butcher's wife, who mentioned it to everyone else. He removed his hat, running a hand through his hair in frustration. Why, Nora? You know why, she said quietly. It's better this way. Better for whom? He challenged. Not for me. And I don't believe it's better for you either. I can't stay here, she insisted. The whispers, the stares, I'll never escape my past in Downieville. Then we'll leave together, he said simply. The suggestion startled her. What? I'll sell the ranch. We can start fresh somewhere else, the 2 of us. You'd give up everything you've built here? She asked incredulously. For me, in a heartbeat, he replied without hesitation. But I'd rather not have to. I'd rather stay and build something with you here. Show these narrow-minded people that their superstitions are nonsense. Nora shook her head, overwhelmed by his proposal. Brody, we've known each other barely 2 months. How can you be so certain? Because when you know, he said, moving closer. I knew the first time I saw you in that millinery shop, watching you handle Beatrice Campbell with more grace than she deserved. I saw a woman with steel in her spine and kindness in her eyes despite everything life had thrown at her. He took her hands, his gaze earnest. Nora Nichols, I'm not asking you to marry me today. I'm asking you not to run away. Stay. Give us a chance to build something real, something that might prove all those whispers wrong. Tears filled her eyes. And if they're not wrong? If something happens to you, then we'll face it together, as we would any challenge life throws our way, he promised. But I refuse to let fear dictate my choices, and I hope you'll do the same. Standing there in her half-packed cabin, Nora found herself at a crossroads. The safe path led away from Downieville, away from Brody, away from the risk of more heartbreak. The other path, the one that terrified and tempted her in equal measure, led toward the possibility of happiness, despite the whispers. "I need to think," she said finally. Brody nodded, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. "I'll wait to hear your decision. Just know that whatever you choose, my feelings won't change." After he left, Nora sat on her bed, staring at the trunk half filled with her belongings. Was she being a coward by leaving? Or was she protecting them both from inevitable tragedy? That night, unable to sleep, Nora walked to the cemetery. Standing before the graves of her 3 husbands, she spoke aloud for the first time in years. "I don't know what to do," she confessed to the silent stones. "I care for him more than I thought possible after everything, but I'm afraid." The night breeze stirred the pine trees overhead, their soft whisper the only response. As Nora stood there, memories of each of her marriages floated through her mind. Thomas's gentle patience, James's enthusiastic plans for their future, Edward's passionate intensity. Each relationship different, each man unique, each loss devastating in its own way. But through it all, she had survived. Not just survived, she had rebuilt her life again and again. Perhaps that was the true pattern. Not the deaths themselves, but her resilience in their wake. And now, Brody was offering her a chance at something she'd given up hoping for. A future built on mutual respect and genuine affection, with a man who saw her strength rather than her supposed curse. As dawn broke over the mountains, Nora made her decision. She would stay not out of fear, but out of courage. The courage to believe that happiness might still be possible, even for her. When she returned to her cabin, she found Brody waiting on her porch, looking as though he hadn't slept either. "I was coming to find you," he said, standing as she approached. "I couldn't wait any longer to hear your answer." Nora took a deep breath. "I'm staying," she said simply. "Not because I believe the whispers are wrong, but because I want to believe that they are. And because what I feel for you is worth the risk." The smile that broke across his face was like sunrise after the longest night. He stepped forward, taking her hands in his. "May I kiss you, Nora Nichols?" She nodded, and as his lips met hers, something inside her that had been tightly wound for years finally began to unravel. It was a gentle kiss, a promise rather than a demand, and when it ended, they stood with foreheads touching, sharing the same breath. "We'll take it slow," he promised. "Day by day." And they did. Through the fall and into winter, their relationship deepened. Brody called on Nora regularly, taking her for rides around his ranch, sharing meals and gradually introducing her to his life outside town. The whispers continued, but they seemed to lose some of their power as months passed without any tragedy befalling Brody Kane. By spring, Nora had begun to hope that perhaps the town's obsession with her curse was finally fading. She still encountered wary glances and the occasional muttered comment, but many people had grudgingly accepted that Brody was determined in his courtship and showed no signs of imminent demise. Then came the day that tested everyone's resolve. Brody was bringing a herd of cattle across the river when a sudden flash flood swept through the canyon. Word reached town that several men had been caught in the deluge, Brody among them. Nora was at the millinery shop when Sheriff Miller burst in with the news. "There's been an accident at the river crossing," he said, his expression grim. "Kane's men are searching for him now." The look in his eyes said everything his words didn't. The curse had struck again. Without a word, Nora grabbed her shawl and ran for the livery stable, renting a horse and riding hard for the river despite calls from townspeople telling her to stay away, that she'd only make things worse. When she arrived at the crossing, chaos greeted her. Men on horseback were scanning the riverbanks while others used long poles to probe the water. The normally placid river had transformed into a raging torrent, carrying debris and churning with dangerous currents. Nora dismounted, her heart pounding with terror. A ranch hand spotted her and approached with a sympathetic expression. "Mrs. Patterson, you shouldn't be here," he said gently. "Where is he?" she demanded, ignoring the implied suggestion that her presence was unwelcome. "Have you found him?" "Not yet, madam." The water came up so fast, several men were swept downstream. "We've found 2 already, but Mr. Kane and young Tim Miller are still missing." Nora stared at the churning water, a terrible emptiness opening inside her. It was happening again. Just when she'd begun to believe, to hope, a shout went up from downstream. "Over here! I see something!" Nora ran toward the commotion, heedless of the mud that clung to her skirts or the branches that tore at her hair. Several men were clustered at a bend in the river where a fallen tree had created a natural dam. As she approached, she saw them pulling someone from the water. Brody. His still form lay motionless on the riverbank as men worked over him, trying to expel water from his lungs. Nora pushed through them, falling to her knees beside him. "Brody," she whispered, taking his cold hand in hers, "please don't leave me." For one terrible moment there was nothing, no movement, no breath. Then suddenly he convulsed, coughing violently as water spewed from his mouth. Nora sobbed with relief as color gradually returned to his face and his eyes fluttered open. "And Nora," he rasped, his voice raw. "I'm here," she assured him, squeezing his hand. "You're going to be all right." His gaze focused on her, and incredibly, a small smile touched his lips. "Told you." Not cursed. A laugh that was half sob escaped her. "Save your strength, you foolish man." As the ranch hands carefully lifted Brody onto a makeshift stretcher, another shout went up from farther downstream. "Found the boy, he's alive." It seemed impossible. Miraculous, both Brody and young Tim Miller had survived the flash flood that could easily have claimed them. As Nora rode beside the wagon carrying Brody back to the ranch house, she couldn't help but wonder if this might finally silence the whispers. The doctor was summoned from town to attend to Brody. After examining him thoroughly, he announced that beyond some bruised ribs and exhaustion, Brody had escaped serious injury. "A miracle," the doctor pronounced. "By all accounts, he should have drowned." Word spread quickly through Downieville. The cursed widow's new beau had faced death and emerged victorious. Some whispered it was just postponing the inevitable, but others began to wonder if perhaps they had been too quick to judge Nora Nichols. As spring turned to summer, Brody recovered fully from his ordeal, and their courtship continued more openly than before. Nora found herself greeted with nods in the street where once there had been averted gazes. Not everyone's minds were changed, but enough that she no longer felt like a pariah in her own town. On a warm evening in July, Brody took her on a picnic to a meadow high above his ranch, where wildflowers painted the landscape in vibrant colors, and the view stretched all the way to the distant mountains. After they'd eaten, he took her hand, his expression unusually serious. "Nora, I've been thinking about us, about our future," her heart quickened. "Have you?" "I want to marry you," he said simply. "I know your history gives you pause, and I understand why, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life than I am of us." Tears filled her eyes. "Brody, I want nothing more than to say yes, but I'm afraid." "I know," he acknowledged, wiping a tear from her cheek. "But here's what I believe. 3 times you loved and 3 times you lost." Perhaps it wasn't a curse, but a preparation teaching you the strength you'd need to try again when the right man came along. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a simple gold ring. "I'm not asking you to believe there's no risk. I'm asking if you believe enough in what we have to take that risk with me." Nora looked at the ring glinting in the evening sunlight, then at the face of the man who had defied superstition and gossip to love her. "What if—" "No what ifs," he interrupted gently. Just us here and now choosing each other despite everything. In that moment, Nora made her decision. She had spent too long allowing fear to dictate her choices. "Yes," she said, her voice gaining strength as she repeated, "Yes, I'll marry you, Brody Kane." His face lit with joy as he slipped the ring onto her finger. "Fourth time's for keeps," he said softly, drawing her into his arms for a kiss that promised a lifetime. Their wedding in September was small but joyful, held in the meadow where Brody had proposed. Mrs. Holloway wept openly, declaring it the happiest day she'd witnessed in years. To Nora's surprise, a fair number of townspeople attended, including Sheriff Miller, who offered a somewhat sheepish congratulation. "Never been happier to be wrong about something, Mrs. Kane," he admitted, using her new name for the first time. As Nora and Brody began their life together at the Cross K Ranch, the whispers gradually faded. When winter passed into spring with Brody still hale and hearty, even the most superstitious had to acknowledge that perhaps Nora's past had been coincidence rather than curse. A year after their wedding, Nora gave birth to a son they named Daniel Thomas Kane. 2 years later, a daughter, Elizabeth Grace, joined their family. The ranch prospered under Brody's careful management, and Nora found a new purpose in raising their children and helping to run their growing operation. 10 years after they wed, Brody and Nora sat on the porch of their ranch house, watching their children play in the yard as the sun set behind the Sierra Nevada mountains. Daniel, now 9, was teaching Elizabeth, 7, how to lasso a fence post, both children laughing as the rope went astray. "Do you ever think about it?" Brody asked, his hand finding hers as it had countless times over the years. "The curse," Nora smiled, shaking her head, "not for a very long time." He brought her hand to his lips, kissing the gold band that had not left her finger in a decade. "Fourth time's for keeps," he reminded her. "I told you so." "So you did," she agreed, leaning against his shoulder. "So you did." As twilight deepened into night, stars appearing one by one above their home, Nora reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From the lonely widow branded with a curse to a beloved wife and mother, her transformation was complete. The whispers had finally been silenced, replaced by the comfortable certainty that some loves were strong enough to defy even the darkest superstitions. And as Brody gathered their children for bedtime stories, his strong arms lifting Elizabeth while Daniel ran ahead up the stairs, Nora knew with absolute clarity that this family, this love, this life was indeed for keeps.